Yes, although there's probably a better title that is more descriptive of what I do. I don't know. Is it too late to change
Okay.
that?
No, I'm happy.
Yeah, it's just
Or I can take
I would say consumer insight.
both. Taylor, type in the chat. Hello everyone, I'm your host Daniel Litwin, the voice of B2B, and you're watching MarketScale's live retail industry roundtable. Thank you again for joining us on another one of these. We love bringing you some quality thought leadership with a great varied panel of experts giving their hottest, sometimes coldest, and most insightful takes on a select retail topic. So this time we're going to be exploring strategies on how to craft a better retail supply chain in the digital age. Now that the effects of COVID are behind us for the most part, the retail supply chain has undergone tremendous strain and permanent shifts. From massive increases in delivery infrastructure to a wider fulfillment footprint to cutting-edge technologies that served as a solution during the pandemic, the retail supply chain looks much different now than it did a year ago. In some ways it looks the same, but has just been accelerated as well. So we're going to be taking a deep dive into various aspects of the retail supply chain post-COVID, from inventory management to shipping to manufacturing to delivery, and the various technologies that are empowering those different wheels that are spinning the retail supply chain machine. So before we do that and introduce our main thought leaders for the discussion, let's add some context on the timeliest news that's impacting this side of the industry today. So let's go ahead and jump in. The COVID effect on the supply chain has obviously been unquestionable. Perhaps one of the biggest winners from the COVID shift was Amazon, and their physical footprint reflects how the supply chain continues to grow. If we look at some new research out of MWPVL, it shows that Amazon has reinvested in its fulfillment centers and its warehouses, adding somewhere around 96 million square feet of new buildings in 2020 and is on track to add another in 2021. So, according to chief economist from Dodge Data and Analytics, Amazon now makes up anywhere from 10 to 12% of the total warehouse construction market. So clearly, the fulfillment side of the supply chain is booming. And it doesn't look like retailers are setting delivery expectation for customers to respond to. In fact, it's quite the opposite. With this growth and higher demand from customers, retailers are playing into the e-commerce frenzy and encouraging the development of consistent online customers and a subsequent supporting fulfillment network. Walmart, for example, is no longer requiring a $35 minimum purchase for its COVID-launched express delivery service. And that was in response to some customer feedback that the $35 minimum was too high for items that customers needed in a hurry. So they're responding well to what customers want out of that supply chain, right? But it's not just Amazon and Walmart that are feeling the pressure to grow that fulfillment footprint. Even smaller players are doing the same. If we look at UK-based Ocado Retail, for example, they're aiming to cut down on delivery times and boost supply capacity by opening fulfillment centers of their own. They have 2 full sites and 12 microsites on the way, and once those are all up and running, they're saying their delivery service will be able to increase in capacity by around 40%. So we're seeing these transformations and investments really support the supply chain. And the transformations are affecting the supply chain from top to bottom. Technologies are really being a big part of the supporting of these changes, especially in last mile logistics and last mile delivery. For example, Chinese retail giant Alibaba just rolled out its newest AI-powered autonomous delivery robots, and that's powered by their research and innovation group. This was to fill end logistic needs on Chinese college campuses, which is another demographic ripe for delivery services. So we've got a lot that is preparing the supply chain to meet this increased demand, and lots of support technologies that are going to be focused on efficiency. There's a lot to get into, so let's go ahead and get into our main conversation for the day to get these conversations moving along. So I want to go ahead and introduce our 4 main guests for the roundtable. Let's go ahead and go down the line. We've got Ashley Burkle, Ashley Burkle, Senior Manager of Retail Solutions at Impinj. Ashley, great to have you on. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thanks, Daniel. Thanks for having me today.
Absolutely. Real pleasure getting to chat today. We've also got Ian Steinberg, SVP of Strategy and Sales, as well as Chief Growth Officer with Signify Solutions. Ian, great to have you on. How are you?
Same. Thanks for having us.
We're also rejoined by Adrian Thomas, President and CEO of Datascan. Adrian, so great to be chatting again. How are you today?
Yeah, very good to see you, Daniel. Thank you for having me on again.
Absolutely. And last but not least, Kayla Schwartz, Senior Manager of Business Intelligence at Salesforce. Great to have you on, Kayla. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. So we've got such a wide variety of perspectives to bring to the conversation today. Our first main section of conversation, folks, is going to be focusing on the retail supply chain's biggest roadblocks. So we're going to break down what those roadblocks are in the supply chain, as well as any potential shakeups on the horizon, and just get your thoughts on what the supply chain and our various professional industry players can do to respond and be proactive. So let's start here. A big one that is weighing over retailers is oversupply. Back in February, consultant group McKinsey estimated the value of unsold clothing worldwide to be anywhere from $168 billion to $192 billion, which is more than twice the regular amount. So I'm curious, are retailers doing enough to push through this oversupply? Yes, no, why or why not? Let's start with Ashley.
So I would say yes, they're doing the best that they can. And obviously oversupply and stuck inventory hurts their bottom line, so they want to move it. What's interesting to note is that the retailers we saw push through their stock the best during even the strictest of COVID restrictions were retailers who had the most accurate view of their inventory. And they were able to unstick that inventory within their stores by being able to use that to ship to consumers, even do curbside. So retailers like Zara and even Lululemon came out and talked about that visibility as helping them get the inventory to go out of the stores when they had the strictest of shutdowns. But what I hope to see retailers do is take 2020 as really a pivotal point to rethink inventory supply overall. Obviously, visibility is important, but they can make shifts to how they supply as well, including more on-demand manufacturing that would give them shorter lead times, and also reducing their safety stock and have lesser dependence on the concept of seasonal inventory. And so again, with greater inventory visibility, I think retailers can go forward doing a better job than they've ever done across channels with that oversupply problem.
Kayla, I want to toss over to you now. I forgot to mention when I was pitching to you, you also focus on consumer insights and strategy for retail and consumer goods. So I feel like your insights here would be incredibly applicable. Can you give us your thoughts on that as well? Do you feel like retailers are meeting the oversupply challenge well or not? Yes or no, why or why not?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I agree with what Ashley said. It really is about having a real-time, localized view of your inventory across your stores, your warehouses, all points at which you have or are storing inventory. And then really being predictive and prescriptive about it. I talk a lot about how important the use of data is to really figure out where to put your inventory to the closest point of demand to reduce a lot of those costs. And then, we saw something that happened with COVID. Ashley touched upon it a minute ago, the idea of seasonal merchandise. So we saw a lot of the seasonal shifts that we typically saw within retail pre-COVID. We saw them start to dissipate. So this idea of longer product seasons really started to take hold in 2020. I anticipate that will continue for the future with retail. And when that happens, we're going to see less inventory overall because seasons aren't going to shift as quickly. But for the retailer or the brand, thinking about how you can communicate that inventory level detail to them, really going to be critical in helping push that inventory out the door and making sure that you don't have that oversupply that McKinsey said we'll see.
All right, next question for y'all. This growing...
Daniel, can I just...
yeah, sure.
There's another layer on that, I think also is retailers may not yet fully understand the implications of returns in their inventory. So, we've all been used to buying, a number of items through the e-com channel and then returning those items back into the supply chain. So I think there's another layer that's a challenge for retailers in managing their overall inventory levels is that returns concept. And I read a statistic recently that, returns numbers are extremely high. And that is going to be an added challenge, I think.
Let's jump over to the omni-channel.
Yeah, and if I can add,
yes, please. Yeah. Let's get everyone's thoughts on this first one, and then we'll diversify up here. Give us your thoughts, Ian.
Yeah. So I agree with what everybody is saying in terms of, I think they're doing the best they can at the moment. I think that where you're going to see a separation in retailers, at least from what we're seeing and the ones we're engaged with, is this notion of how do you fulfill to the consumer, to the shopper? And so I think what you're going to see, and I think it touches upon what everybody is saying here, is this notion of new channels. And that's really what's going to deal not just with the overstock, but the entire movement of the supply chain. So like, for instance, we're dealing with micro channels and micro retail channels. So instead of things being couch versus counter, do I buy it in the store? Do I buy it at the home? How do I do this curbside now? How do I do something in between? So I think what you're going to see is all of these facets that the others are bringing up. The ones who are really going to get ahead of the curve are the ones who are going to create these omni-channel experiences where regardless of the channel that you fulfill the merchandise through, the supply chain through, you're going to get a unified experience. And I think that's where the retailers, I think like Ashley, you said in 2021, the ones that are going to really step up and try to create this unified experience through multiple channels, they're the ones who you're going to see not having the overstock, moving merchandise around in a very unique way.
Let's jump to the omni-channel challenge for retailers, especially as this digital footprint continues to grow. Obviously, on top of all of this, they have to make sure that each channel predicts varying types of consumer behavior to make sure that the supply chain matches said type and level of demand. So I'm curious, which of the various sales channels do all of you see as being the most important for retailers moving forward, and why? And then on top of that, what are some of the consumer behavior strategies that they'll have to keep in mind for that channel? Let's start with Adrian on this one.
I think in the last year, because of COVID, I mean, the growth in e-com has been enormous. So that is now front and center of many retailers' minds in terms of the channels that they're going to have to focus on for their supply chain. But I do think we're going to see a resurgence in the importance of brick and mortar. You put up a stat just before we started that I think this is the first year we're going to see more stores opening than closing. And I think once the restrictions from COVID get eased, I mean, obviously here we're in the US, we're significantly further ahead than they are in Europe. There will be a pent-up demand to get back into the brick and mortar environment. So I think, and that brick and mortar environment obviously will be, there's some omni-channel components to that around, BOPIS or click and collect, which has grown dramatically. But it's also going to see a lot of people going back into a physical store to try and to buy. So I think there will be a balance, and it will vary from retail vertical to retail vertical between the true e-com, 100% e-com through to 100% brick and mortar, and there'll be a balance in the middle.
Let's jump over to Kayla. Kayla, do you agree or disagree there?
Yeah, I agree. We spoke to consumers and asked them, going forward in 2021, where do you expect to do a lot of your shopping? And by and far, despite the growth that we saw in digital last year, brick and mortar is still the most preferred way for consumers to shop. And this is across all generations, even the youngest, so Gen Z. So it's interesting. So it really comes down to, what we were talking about earlier, the omni-channel experience, creating a unified experience from the point of discovery to the point of fulfillment, and even returns and loyalty. You have to be thinking about how every touch point in the journey feels like the consumer is engaging with one brand. And we found that on average, today's consumer has about 9 different touch points with your brand before they make a purchase, whether that purchase is through digital or in the store. So that's 9 different ways in which your consumer is engaging with you. And a lot of those engagements aren't happening on your website or in your store. They're happening completely off property. So it might be through social, it might be through some of these emerging channels like gaming, and all of these new digital ways that consumers are discovering brands. So I agree. I think the store is still, and it is going to continue to be, an incredibly important channel for retail, but it's thinking about how you create that unified digital and physical experience that's going to keep your customers coming back.
All right, we're jumping to our first visual question for the day. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to have all of you prepare your agree, disagree card. For our audience here, we're going to be asking our guests a question. They're going to have to hold up a sheet of paper that's going to say either agree or disagree, and then we're going to create a little soft debate here. So for this retail supply chain roadblock, we're going to be chatting a little bit about infrastructure. Obviously, a US-based supply chain is going to get nowhere without the infrastructure to quite literally support that haul of goods. And the base of our supply chain infrastructure is looking a little rough. The American Society for Civil Engineers recently reported its 2021 report card for America's infrastructure. So they grade various aspects of our infrastructure from aviation to waste, and they gave our roads, obviously critical for our retail supply chain, a D grade. That's a failing grade. It's the same grade as our roads had in 2017, so about 4 years worth of little to no progress. And 40% of those roads are now marked as either poor or mediocre condition. So here's my hot take that you have to agree or disagree with, and then we'll get some thoughts. Poor roads are going to permanently inhibit the growth of the US retail supply chain moving forward. Do we agree or do we disagree? All right, ready? 3, 2, 1. Let's see those answers. Disagree, agree, disagree. Ooh, nice, right down the middle. That's what I like to see. Okay, let's start with Ashley. So you disagree. Give us your thoughts why.
I disagree in the sense that I don't think it will permanently inhibit the growth. I do think that poor roads have been a problem for a long time, and we know that infrastructure is crucial. And what we see is companies and communities actually investing in innovative ways to help some of these road issues. Amazon, as an example, setting up lockers in certain communities where delivering to a centralized location will actually help avoid difficult roads, traffic, even construction. We're also seeing some companies look at drones as an ability to solve some of those challenges as well. So I think long term, we're obviously going to need to continue as a country to invest in infrastructure and the roads, but I do think we'll make progress. I think companies will continue to invest in innovations, and of course, it's always important for us to make sure that our people on the ground are not in dangerous predicaments with roads and bridges across the U.S. But I do think it won't permanently inhibit our supply chain.
I love it. All right, now someone that had a disagreeing to that disagree opinion. Someone who agreed. Give us your thoughts.
Yeah, so I'll go first. The reason that I agreed to it, and by the way, will it permanently damage? I don't know about permanent, but if you think about the next 3 to 4 years, what we're seeing is that, and I go back to the last film, it's so much of merchandising right now, so much of the supply chain right now. Think of it like you have inventory management on one side, and then you have the last mile fulfillment. The challenge with the infrastructure is if it's not invested in, if it's not set up, look at who those merchandisers are doing that last mile fulfillment. And the hardest part is going to be for them to get the goods from part A to part B, meaning where it's centralized to that individual shopper. So to me, the reason I agreed with it is because if you don't attack that last mile fulfillment and infrastructure is a part of it, I think you're going to see a ripple effect, a domino effect that nobody wants to see, but I think will be reality.
All right, let's jump over to our last question for this section. But another important factor that is shaping the retail supply chain is the workforce that is quite literally making it happen. And when we look back on the pandemic, we saw many workers, were dealing with treacherous conditions during the pandemic, and these companies really had to step up to make sure workers were kept safe. And we continue to see a lot of high-profile disputes about better working conditions, higher wages, etc. And y'all might know where I'm going with this, but one of the biggest ones is the Amazon warehouse workers that are organizing right now in Bessemer, Alabama. They want to be represented by the RWDSU, and if they succeed, they'd be the first unionized Amazon warehouse in the US. So I want to get sort of a round table, which is perfect, it's what we're on, a round table discussion here on what is going to be the impact of this kind of high profile unionizing effort in the retail supply chain. And what are your thoughts on what retailers, industry advocacy groups, or unions can do to continue to ensure that workers' working conditions are prioritized as the retail supply chain grows and grows? Who wants to jump on that one first?
So I think that it's critical that we put health and safety for employees first. It has to be a priority focus. And so one of the ways advocacy groups, unions can ensure that really is being able to listen to the employees who are on the ground and work collaboratively with them to drive the automations that improve the conditions. And again, focus on their health and safety. I think one of the greatest aspects of when workers come together collectively is being able to have that singular voice that helps companies actually better understand the challenges that they're facing and then solve that together.
Anyone else on that one?
Yeah, I think there's a number of facets here. I think that obviously you've got the health and safety aspect, which has been brought into focus as a result of COVID. I think you've got the adoption of technology, which I think will further automation be driven throughout the retail supply chain and into stores, and how does the labor force be measured and performing? How do they perform with that? And then I think there's the cost. Our labor costs are going to increase as a result of some of these measures, and ultimately, if they do, then that will drive prices up to the consumer potentially. So a number of different layers, I think, as a result of the sort of changes that are going on in the management of labor in the retail space.
All right, y'all, it's time to jump to our next section. We're going to be taking a short break from the classic discussion to get into one of our classic debate sections. So this time we're playing overrated versus underrated. We're going to be getting some hot takes on specifically either overrated or underrated on cutting edge technologies in the retail supply chain. So the way this will flow is I'll pose a technology, then each of you will either hold up your overrated or underrated sheet to the camera, and then based on the answers, I'll ask a few of you to give me your hot takes and expand on why you think said tech is overrated or underrated. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to jump in and start with this technology. First one is RFID tech in the supply chain. Broad, lots of applications, but I'm curious, overrated or underrated? RFID tech. All right, we're going to count it down. 3, 2, 1. Let's see those visuals. Underrated, underrated, underrated. Everyone thinks it's underrated. That's what I like to see, some consensus. Okay, let's start with Kayla on this one. Kayla, why underrated?
Yeah, I think it's one of the technologies that it's not as flashy, right, as say drone technology or some of the other buzzwords that we see flying around. But the benefits of RFID technology is that it enables, the easy collection of data. And so when you're thinking about the supply chain, the ability to share and access data is incredibly important to creating a better supply chain and improving the flow of goods throughout that chain. So I think it's underrated. I think, it has the potential to be a game changer for retail.
My thought on, and I know we're in the industry about inventory accuracy, but the use of RFID to manage your inventory will drive greater inventory accuracy, which is absolutely critical to an efficient omni-channel process. So having the right product in the right place and understanding that your book records are accurate for inventory at the unit level, which is what RFID can give you, is absolutely critical. So I don't know that it's underrated. I think everybody has seen the benefit of RFID for many years. I mean, you go back 20 years and we were talking about the adoption of RFID. I just think we haven't seen the emphasis on rolling it out across retail generally to this point. And I think there's a lot of impetus post-COVID that we will see tremendous adoption of RFID solutions across our retail industry.
All right, next one, overrated or underrated. This one is a little more buzzwordy. Drones in the warehouse. Basically, drones on site being used in any form or function within a fulfillment center or retail supply chain space. All right, what do we think here? Overrated or underrated? 3, 2, 1. Let's see those visuals. Over. I love this. I love the consistent consensus. This is good. Okay, Ashley, you're thinking drones maybe a little overrated in the warehouse. How come?
I think today, maybe they're a little overrated and possibly because of the buzz around them. But I do think it's company and warehouse dependent. Obviously, drones don't function in all styles of warehouses and all distribution centers. They can contribute to automation and efficiency, again, in the right location. But I don't think they'll be viable for all retailers. What I think I'm seeing more of is robots enabled with reading and scanning capabilities as well as wearables. So I see that being implemented a little bit more momentum around that, and maybe drones in the future. But again, it's going to be location and retailer dependent, how important and how valuable that technology can be for them.
Ian, let's get your thoughts there as well.
Yeah, no, to me, it's overrated. I think similar because of the timing. I think there's tremendous opportunity for drones in the retail space and the supply chain space, depending on how it's utilized. But I think it's right now the bright, shiny object. It's the thing that everybody says, ooh, I want to do that too. But is it realistic in the next 6, 12, 18 months compared to all the other technologies out there and how we're going to deal with the post-COVID environment and where we're going in retail? So I would say, is the opportunity there? Yes. Is the timing there? I think for right now, it's highly overrated compared to what it's really going to do.
All right, last one that I want to toss your way for overrated, underrated is one that got big during the pandemic and I think is here to stay, but I'm curious whether you think over or under, into what capacity. So that's going to be click and collect and BOPIS software. We've touched on this a little bit. I wonder if there's any other dynamics here that we want to jump into. So click and collect, BOPIS software is a big one. Overrated or underrated in any capacity? Ready? 1, 2, 3, boom. Under, 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 under. This is the day of consensus. I love it. We are just all on the same wavelength. Okay, Adrian, let's jump to you. You say underrated. How come? What maybe isn't being utilized to full extent on BOPIS yet?
Well, yeah, but BOPIS obviously is a process. So
right.
This is a strategy that retailers have to choose whether they adopt or not. And there's a number of different components that can go into it, an accurate inventory distribution through a retail store. I think the people that adopt BOPIS early have driven more traffic through their stores than those that didn't. And I think that's what we're going to see, more and more retail focus on driving BOPIS, or maybe click and collect, and it's pretty much the same, really to get foot traffic through the store so that once an individual is in the store, they will be physically present to buy an additional item once they're there. And I think that goes from whether it's grocery, all the way through to high-end fashion. If you want to buy clothing through your local Nordstrom store, retailers want to get people in the store because human nature is once you're there, you're going to buy something else.
Yeah, if I can just
and if I could just, you go first.
No, go ahead, Ian. I cut you off.
No, it's okay, Taylor, you go. I'll jump in after.
Okay.
The classic challenge.
I was just going to add, I agree with you, Adrian. We study at Salesforce, we are looking at any given time, 1 billion shoppers that are transacting across our commerce platform. And we, over the past year, have looked at websites that are offering a BOPIS solution versus those that are not offering a BOPIS solution or click and collect. And particularly here in the US, we saw for US sites offering this option on their website, they grew almost double the pace. Their online sales grew almost double year over year compared to their peers that were not offering this solution. And especially over the holiday season, it was incredibly significant and obvious the difference in performance that sites who were offering BOPIS to their customers, how they performed compared to their peers. So just based on the data alone and the way the consumers are utilizing the technology, it really does appear to be table stakes for brands. That last mile fulfillment component of that customer journey is so incredibly important. And Adrian, as you said, we also see that for customers that utilize click and collect or BOPIS, their basket sizes are typically double than that in the store or even just a regular online purchase. So there's incredibly compelling data to show the value of the BOPIS customer. And I think that all retailers who have a physical footprint should be encouraging their customers to utilize BOPIS. Maybe
just one comment on the process.
Yeah. And then
oh, sorry, and we keep interrupting you. Go ahead.
That's true.
No, that's okay. What I was going to add to what you both are saying, and I think Adrian and Kayla are hitting it, is what we're seeing at Signify with the customers in multiple retail segments are talking about is that BOPIS is going to be critical to their strategies going forward. It's that hybrid, if you think of it, between online and delivery at home and buying in the store. And if you think about it from the perspective of what does BOPUS give you? It gives you convenience and it gives you experience, and it fits that middle ground. And so what we're seeing in a lot of the customers that we're talking to, not only is the data showing more and more is the carts are larger, the purchases are larger, you bring people near the store, they want to go back into the store. It's that whole combination dynamic. What BOPUS gives somebody that on-home delivery doesn't give, it mixes convenience with experience. And if you look at it from what you're talking about with the BOPUS software, how do you deliver that experience? You do it through the whole buy online, and then how do you fulfill that in the store? So when you look at just that combination, I don't think BOPUS is just here to stay. I think what COVID did, it actually accelerated. You're going to see BOPUS being more and more adopted by all the large retailers as well as small retailers.
Yeah,
Adrian,
Ian.
real quick, I know you had some final thoughts on that.
But I think from what we've seen pre-COVID, BOPUS really just started, but we did see that stores were being used as distribution points for delivery to home. And I think pre-COVID, we saw it begin to change because retailers, there is a cost to that, obviously, the shipping cost, but also they were missing out on the fact that, as we've all been discussing, that you want to drive foot traffic through the store, even if it's just to pick up an item. The final point I wanted to make is that needs to change process within the store as well, because your retail associates are now going to have to become pickers, or somebody's going to have to pick the items to be able to be picked up or distributed. So there is a component to the change of process, physical process in the store, to be able to support an efficient BOPUS strategy. And then the other final point I'll make is you've got to have accurate inventory, because you don't want to place an order online and find it's not available in the store.
All right, team, we're jumping over to our next section. Thank you for playing a good game of underrated, overrated. I love the consensus. I wonder if we'll see that on this next one. What we're going to be chatting about is predicting the unpredictable. So with this section, we're going to be focusing on various scenarios that create a lot of unpredictability in the retail supply chain and coming up with some strategies on, again, how to predict the unpredictable. So we're going to start here. As we saw in Texas and across the Midwest recently, we had some massive winter storms and general weather stoppage. And in general, natural disasters can put a major damper on supply chain efficiency. And this is especially true when natural disasters then impact local energy infrastructure, which can cut power to fueling stations, warehouses, the actual retail stores, and more. So what are some thoughts from y'all on what can retailers be doing to be more proactive against this, to ensure that their supply chain is resilient against these kinds of major structural challenges that extend beyond even just their industry and what they can control? It's a toughie for sure.
So I'd say that visibility is key. It's foundational. It all falls apart if you don't know what you have and where it is. So this would really unlock one barrier to overcoming the complex logistics that we are seeing today and create a little bit more resilience. I also think diversifying where warehouses and DC locations are and make it more distributed. So this is where leveraging regional locations or stores to ensure that non-weather affected areas or locations can still get inventory. I think Target is a great example of how they've turned their stores into hubs so they can still serve customers that aren't in the weather affected areas with inventory that they have versus those customers being affected because of centralized inventory. And I think we saw in 2020, you can't predict whether it's weather or even pandemics, but if you are too centralized, you'll see the ripple effect across all of your customers that you serve. So I would definitely say visibility and more distributed supply chain.
I can add to
Agree or disagree, team. Any other thoughts?
Yeah,
Yes,
I agree with you, Ashley. Everything you said, spot on. We especially saw this during last year's holiday season. Coming up on the season, we knew that there was going to be unprecedented demand on the logistics chain because of this massive demand for digital that we were anticipating due to COVID. And so what we were seeing retailers do early on was thinking about how they can move their inventory closer to the source of demand. So, instead of having the bulk of your inventory sitting in distribution centers, as Ashley said, which might, be centralized to certain locations across the country, thinking about how you can move that inventory closer to the demand, using your stores. And recently I did an interview with Sally Beauty, and they talked about how this really benefited them at the beginning of COVID when all their stores were shut down, their warehouses were shut down. They had a lot of their inventory already sitting at the store. And so for them, they were able to fulfill directly from the store to those local customers. And it actually became an acquisition channel for them, where they were able to find new customers who never would have purchased from them before because they had that inventory closest to the demand, where that demand was needed. So visibility and thinking about how you can move that inventory into closer to that community is key.
Yeah, I also, just to add to this, I think this is an area that you're going to see where the coming of age of artificial intelligence and machine learning linked into that visibility, linked into that supply chain. That exactly what Kayla and Ashley you're talking about is you're going to see, I think, the retailers who fare really well in the next few years having more of a layered approach to a resilient supply chain. And that visibility, that data, that ability to move merchandise ahead of the storm versus behind the storm. I think the ones who are really looking at AI and machine learning and how to leverage that in terms of predictability, and it does get into that whole predictive analytics and risk kind of mitigation. You're going to see a lot of successes for the ones that adopt that, and you're going to see a lot of hardship for the ones that don't.
All right, we're jumping over to another question here. I'm going to have you whip out your agree-disagree paper again for this one. So an increasingly digital supply chain, and one that relies on more IoT network integrated technology, is ever more at risk of unexpected tech failures, as well as system breaches due to hackers or bad actors. So here's a hot take, and then I want to get an agree-disagree. The retail industry has not been given the adequate resources and education to protect itself from these ever-changing tech failures and network hacks. Do we agree or disagree? Is the industry prepped for this? Let's get those answers. All right, 3, 2, 1, boom. Let's hit it. Agree, disagree. Okay, we've got the 50-50 dissent. All right, this is always a good time. All right, let's start with Adrian. Adrian, give us your thoughts.
I think generally retailers have done a reasonable job to this point of protecting the data, but I think the challenge for them is their interaction with their consumers is becoming, wider and wider in the use of in the digital usage of applications. And I don't know that they're going to be able to keep up with the ability that hackers will have to get into their systems through these third-party or integrated applications. Part of our business is trying to extract data and exchange data with retailers, and some do it very well. Some are still in the dark ages when it comes to network security. And I think we'll see some challenges that retailers will have to protect themselves for the dissemination of their own data.
Ashley, let's jump over to you. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think technology and technology threats are dynamic, ever-changing, and we've seen the increase over the last years and decades. But what I see as a positive in retail is that as retailers embrace digital transformation, they're moving away from their old legacy systems that were really ripe for breaches and hacks. And some of those systems were homegrown, pieced together, and very old. So again, as retailers embrace that digital transformation, they're actually gaining more tools and more security for their business, and of course, all the way into their end consumer, which, as we know from previous years, have been hit by retailers having gaps in their security. So I think it's getting better. I don't think any industry will ever be 100% safe. As we know, the attackers are sometimes one step ahead. But I do think retail is getting better as they embrace more technology and invest in more security.
All right, last one for this section. COVID reminded us just how essential China is to the global supply chain. And as China has grown its economy, its own supply chain, and global influence as an economic leader, the last several decades have been marked by a lot of pressure against that growth, which has unexpected consequences on U.S. retailers. And this is manifested in many different ways. Everything from technology bans on critical smartphone chips and digital apps to high-profile trade wars and tariffs to investments in supply chain independence. So I'm curious what the dynamics are going to look for here moving forward. Any thoughts from all of you on that China-U.S. sort of geopolitical dynamic and whether or not these dynamics or regulations are going to have a major impact on the global retail supply chain moving forward? Why or why not? Who wants to jump in on this one first?
I'll make a comment then to get us going, but I think generally there is a post-COVID move to what I've termed the term economic nationalism, and maintaining the core products for your own use. And I think that you've got the added layer of the U.S.-China relationship over the last 4 or 5 years. We're seeing challenges. I saw a story recently where H&M were under fire for infringing some cotton issue with the Chinese market. So I think we're going to see a lot more of that. So I think what that will drive is retailers having to look to diversify their source of supply to be able to adapt. If plan A does not work, what is our plan B? And does that come from an alternative source from another region of the world? And I think China is just one component of that. There's various other components to it, but it's such a major player in all of our manufacturing and retail goods supply chain. Any deterioration or restriction by China will have an enormous impact on retail.
Any final thoughts on this one before we get to our last segment?
Yeah, I'll add one thing to it, but the challenge with answering is there's no easy answer.
Right.
So the way that I kind of think of it is you've got local retail. I think what you're going to see, and I think, Adrian, you're talking a little about it, is you're going to see local regional retailers, and then you're going to see global retailers. And more, I think there's going to be a bit of a split because of this nationalism, because of what's happening. And so the impact on the global retailers, they're going to have to try to figure it out. The impact on the local regional retailers, I think, is going to be more of a domino effect. So I think that the challenge with a question like this is there is no simple answer because there are so many variables, how they play and how they come together. I think we could do an entire hour just on that alone.
Probably, and you might be giving me ideas for our next retail roundtable, so noted. All right, our final topic for the day is going to be playing a retail lightning round. We've got one last game for you, and this one is basically getting your quick thoughts on some strategies to scale. So we've broken down the biggest challenges impacting the supply chain. We've broken down how to be proactive around some of the most unpredictable ones, and we've given thoughts on supply chain tech. So now I want to get your thoughts on how to take all of those and turn them into a scaled retail supply chain. So with the structure of the game, the way this is going to work is I'm going to ask you a question around supply chain scaling strategy. And I'll point that question to one of you specifically. You'll then have 15 seconds on the clock, and that clock will be live on screen to give your response. So it's got to be fast and to the point. Once you're done, I'll toss it over to another guest who can either agree or disagree. They've also got 15 seconds on the clock to give their hot take. So we're really putting that brain power to the test today, folks. Let's jump in. I'm going to start with this first one. This one I'm going to ask to Adrian. So Adrian, do some stretches. Here we go. All right. First question is on operating lean. As big players like Amazon continue to force efficiency across the industry, what is the most important thing retailers can do to operate lean and why? Boom.
Right product, right place. So driving that inventory accuracy number to at least 98% is going to become increasingly important, and RFID could play a big part in that.
Boom. Look at that. You still had some time on the clock. All right, let's jump over to Ashley now. So Ashley, I want your agree or disagree there. Same question. And let's go now.
Absolutely agree. Know what you have, where you have it, visibility and accuracy. RFID plays a major role in that, and it is definitely the technology that will help retailers be lean across their entire value chain. Time's up.
Boom. There we go. There we go. And save that one. Yeah, I love it. That was great. Okay, let's jump to our next one. So this one is on asset management. Ashley, we'll start with you now. We're going to kind of go down the line and you can kind of predict here. So this is going to be on asset management. So Ashley, here's the question for you. What is the best way that AI and smart tech in general can support retail asset management, and why? Give us your thoughts.
So it's going to sound similar to last conversation, but I would definitely say RFID. So as retailers are adding more assets into their stores and into their supply chains, being able to track it using RFID is something we see and is very valuable.
All right, Ian, we're going to throw it over to you now. Give us that quick follow-up. You agree or disagree there on the best way to put AI and smart tech to use to support retail asset management? And you're on the clock.
Yeah, so I would agree, but the reason I would agree is I think the biggest use of AI is going to be to get that data, cleanse it, enhance it, and turn it into information and insights that you can use. I think RFID AI to get that's what's going to do.
Love that. Love that. All right, here's our next one. We're going to throw this one, Ian, we're going to start with you. This one is on same-day delivery. So here's your question. What is the biggest pitfall to avoid when building a same-day delivery infrastructure, and why? Boom, you're on the clock.
Yeah, so the way that I think of it is no matter what channel you go through, think of it as a shopper, browse, shop, pay, and fulfill. And the biggest part of that is that last mile fulfillment. So whether it's same day, next day, whatever it's going to be, it's how do you fulfill around that convenience factor?
All right, love that. Kayla, following up there, same question for you. Biggest pitfall to avoid in same-day delivery infrastructure, 15 seconds, go.
Yeah, I think it's thinking that you have to do it yourself. If 2020 taught us anything, that crowdsourcing is an incredibly viable channel. And just as Ian said, thinking about, the entire experience and what that means for your consumer.
Love it. And just to bring the cycle all the way back around, we got one more of these. This one's on supply chain team management. So we'll start with Kayla on this one. Kayla, as the retail supply chain expands, so do the types of jobs and roles that oversee the supply chain. So what is the best thing retailers can do to manage their growing supply chain team in a sustainable and positive way? 15 seconds, go.
Oh, this is a tough one. We talked a lot about the usage of AI, how you can use AI and data and helping to inform your team to make the best decisions possible.
Love that. Yeah, I feel like technology is going to be a big one moving forward, especially cleaning that data. We'll bring it back around to Adrian to wrap us up. Same question for you. Give us that follow-up on best thing retailers can do to manage their growing supply chain teams. 15 seconds.
I would agree. It's the use of data and the ability to use that data to identify supply chain vulnerabilities and supply chain risks, so that then you can develop strategies to avoid those or minimize any impact.
Incredible. You all really are able to condense your thoughts in 15 seconds. Maybe I'll need to bump it down to 10 next time and really keep everyone on their toes. I love it. I think that does it for our live show today. We're going to end on this high note. Thank you so much to all of you for your thoughts today and giving us really the full lay of the land on the challenges, the strategies, and looking into the crystal ball on that retail supply chain and the effects now that we're post-COVID. So I'm going to go down the line again, thank all our guests, Ashley Burkle, Senior Manager of Retail Solutions at Impinj, Ian Steinberg, SVP of Strategy and Sales, as well as Chief Growth Officer with Signify Solutions, Adrian Thomas, President and CEO of Datascan, and Kayla Schwartz, Senior Manager of Business Intelligence and Consumer Insights and Strategy for Retail and Consumer Goods at Salesforce. Thank you again to all four of you. This has really been a fantastic conversation, and we'll chat with all of you again soon. And on that note, thank you to everyone for watching this episode of our live industry roundtable. We'll be back next week with a different industry, more insights. Circle back around in a few weeks for more live retail content. Till then, head to our website, marketscale.com. Plenty of content to consume. I'm your host, Daniel Litwin, the voice of B2B, and we'll catch you next time.